Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us going. I think if anybody was going to join, they probably would have made it by now, but we'll see if anybody joins as we go along. That's fine as well. So hopefully everyone is doing well tonight. As far as updates for the course, I just wrapped up grading the week 1 analysis, and overall pretty good turnout there. I thought for the most part, there's a really good amount of detail, which is something I always look for, is plenty of detail and elaboration in explaining your observations. And I'll actually go over some of the basic parts of the analysis in a minute. Also, I have given my feedback on your week 2 explorations, which are all about the use of color in movie posters. So look for that as well. And a comment that I may have said this last week, but with the exploration activities, if for the most part you're going to get a 100 if you complete the assignment, but still look at my feedback, because I will sometimes look for things that might need clarification or expand on something you mentioned, or even point out something that you might not have mentioned that that is also in the example. So take a look at that, and it might be helpful in as you move towards the analysis for this week. Other announcement is, again, I'm going to be out of town starting tomorrow. I'm going to have my MacBook with me, so I'll be peeking at email periodically. So if you do need to get in touch, go ahead and drop me a message. But hopefully there won't be any interruption in the class whatsoever. That's my goal. And how about you? How's everybody doing? Are there any questions or any concerns that I could address before I dive into the material for the week? Okay. And as I'm going through the presentation, if you do have any questions, feel free to jump in. You can either type on the chat or open up your microphone if you would rather talk. Otherwise, it'll be a lot of me talking. So one thing I like to do each week is to go over the analysis from the previous week. So looking at the week 1 analysis, which was all about the Chipotle scarecrow video. Just an overview of some of the factors here. We were looking at emotional design, so at the 3 levels: visceral, behavioral, and reflective. I think most everyone was on track as far as their observations. It's pretty common for each person to focus on a different aspect of it, so there might have been some things that not everybody touched on. So just to make sure that these are all pointed out. With the visceral level, remember, just to review, that this level deals with really basic instinctive reactions and things that we just kind of have that gut feeling towards. You don't really have to think about it. It just sort of, you respond. One of the most pervasive elements in the video at the visceral level is simply the use of facial expressions and body language, especially with the scarecrow, but also in other characters. You see the faces of the secondary characters, and even the sad cow with those eyes. So it really doesn't have to be a realistic human face. As long as it's a recognizable face, it can evoke that sense of empathy in us, and we mirror the feelings that this person is showing us. So what that allows for the designers to do is to instill an emotional hook into their media that gets us engaged. We now care about what's happening here. If we're paying attention, we would now start to feel this sense of of disillusionment that the Scarecrow has, and start following his story. So it's a way of really just drawing your viewers in if you make use of that technique. I think everybody mentioned the use of the music, and the music is an interesting case because it operates really on two different levels. There's just the tone or the key of the music. Even without words, this can influence moods. And that's something you see in movie soundtracks and scores, especially in horror movies where you see the little shrill violin sounds building up the tension and so forth. But that was also true here with Fiona Apple's cover of Pure Imagination, is very mellow and really subdued and ties in with that more depressed feeling at the beginning of the video, and then becomes a little higher key once we see the pepper and everything starts to become more hopeful. And then the lyrics operate more on a more of a mental level. They're things we listen to and we interpret and we think about. It can have personal meaning to us, or it can convey a message that's a little bit more reflective in nature. And very similar to the way the music operates is the way the color operates. And it sort of just underscores the mood. It's not a conscious message to us, but just sort of an overall atmosphere. And so in the early parts of the video, like we see in this scene on the left, it's very gray and muted and overcast and makes us feel more like depressed, just like the music is more depressed. And then later on, he discovers the pepper in this green garden, and the colors are so vibrant, and it really shifts the mood altogether. So some very subtle media elements that influence our reactions on a really, really subtle, unconscious level. The behavior level is a little trickier, and it's not really obvious. They don't really come out and say what they're doing with this video, but since this is a commercial, we can assume that they're trying to sell something. They're trying to promote something, and that something is Chipotle's food. And even then, they don't really come out and even show a Chipotle logo, at least not until maybe the end of the video when they have the game. The corresponding game is shown. But what they do instead is depict the factory-produced food in this very negative way, with all these very unappealing colors, darkly lit. It has really repulsive practices in the creation of the food, and then comparing that to the very happy, brightly lit farm-grown foods that are here representing Chipotle. So it's really showing Chipotle's food as the more desirable, must-have alternative. And the reflective level is really where a lot of the symbolic meaning comes in, a lot of the big picture messages that the commercial is giving us. And this really transcends the commercial aspect of the video. It just is the story, where we see although there is that aspect of questioning how your food is produced and where it comes from and what the consequences of that are for the planet as well as the animals and us, for our health. But then we also have this almost like the hero's journey, where the Scarecrow it becomes really disenchanted with the status quo of his world and decides to do things differently, and in the end kind of shoos away his oppressor, the crow, and then here at the very end we see that people are starting to notice, and it's starting to bring about a change, and the banner unrolls, and and we're called upon to cultivate a better world. So it's that that idea of one person's actions can make a difference in the world, and that's very much a reflective level idea. And an important thing to notice is that these things all work together. The visceral level experiences make us become engaged and kind of pull us in so that we can then experience this story about the scarecrow, which through his experiences gives us the behavioral level message about Chipotle. So it's all interwoven. And then oftentimes, if you can connect with your audience on more than one level of emotion, the stronger your message will be received. Were there any other observations or anything that you wanted to mention? Okay, so moving into this week's material, we're talking about color and the use of color. And we already got into that a little bit in the Scarecrow video because we saw how color could influence our moods and color could symbolize certain things. We saw the bright red pepper that really signified a change in the story. And color is certainly pretty influential. It's one of our fundamental aspect of our sense of sight. And it has been explored and investigated for centuries by visual artists as well as scientists who research our senses and psychology. So we're going to look at this based on two topics, and they are color theory and color psychology. And color theory is more of a formal study of how colors can be combined to create a specific visual impression or energy. It's not really about the emotion necessarily of just sort of the look and feel that it's going for. Whereas color psychology is about emotion. It's about symbolic meaning and interpretation of what color communicates to us. So two sides of the same coin, but very different aspects. I'm going to show you a couple of movie posters. These are actually fake movie posters that were used in the movie Scott Pilgrim versus the World, which is one of my favorite movies. But these are pretty fun. They're based on one of the characters from that movie who was a movie star. So when you look at this poster, what kind of impression does it give you? What would you expect that movie to be like? A lot of action. Yeah, full of action. It's even in the title, Action Doctor. Where did your eye go first when you looked at this movie poster? Right to the fire. All right. Now let's take a second example. What kind of feeling does this evoke? It's a very seductive and romantic type movie. Romance and sadness. And the last one. And same questions. What kind of impression does this give, and what would you expect the movie to be like? And also, what catches your eye first? So it's mystery and action. And the clock catches your eye. Okay, so the figure was what caught Allison's eye first. All right. So I picked these in particular. I happened to stumble upon these online at some point and thought these are great examples. And each one really leverages color in particular to reinforce the themes that are in each film. And these are fake. These are made to be fake movie posters within a movie, but they're made using the same ideas that you would see in actual movie posters, which you probably saw in your exploration. The use here of the orange and blue, which you see in many movie posters, because those are complementary. They contrast strongly, and it creates that sense of dynamic action and high energy. Whereas analogous colors like this are softer, they're more harmonious, and especially with the warm analogous colors, you get that more of a warm and comforting feeling that could go well with a romantic film. And then here's achromatic. This is achromatic, meaning colorless. It's black and white with accent colors, the red. It gives it a really dramatic look, but then that burst of red that we'll see could be kind of give an impression of action or danger. Okay, so that's these examples really touch on topics that go from both of our subjects for today, color theory as well as psychology. Let's start off with color theory. If you've ever taken an art class, you might have run into the color wheel. And the color wheel is the basic representation of color theory. Color theory is the basic rules that have been developed over the many centuries by artists that guide how they pick and combine colors. This is actually based on the way our eyes work, the way our photoreceptors in the back of our eye work, is they're able to process colors, but different colors compete for attention, and so those competing colors are put on opposite sides of the color wheel, and they contrast strongly. So by arranging them in this way, you can easily reference how those colors are going to interact visually to your viewers. And I don't want to go too much into there's a lot of neuroscience behind that, which you can read about in your textbook reading, actually. But but the important thing is to understand this relationship, that the color wheel is based on the colors' relationship to one another. Those that are opposite have really high contrast, while those that are adjacent to one another are more harmonious and more similar. And we'll see how that's important in a minute. Some terminology, really quick. A color, what we would call a color, if you looked at your box of crayons, is formally referred to as a hue, a color hue. So that means a pure color. Then you have lighter and darker varieties of that same color. So if you were working with paint, for example, you could mix black paint to create a darker variety of red, and that would be called a shade of red or a shade of orange or any of the other hues. And then if you were mixing paint and you mix white paint, that would create a tint, T-I-N-T, and that's just a lighter variety. So pink, for example, is really a tint of red. So if you hear me use these terms, you'll know that if I say shade, I'm specifically referring to a darker variety of color. A tint is a lighter. Sometimes we use these terms interchangeably, I think, in casual conversation, but they do have very specific meanings. And you also have what are referred to as warm colors and cool colors. And this is kind of intuitive. The warm colors are the ones that are kind of call to mind ideas of heat or fire, or if you look at the hot element on your stove when you cook, it turns red. So that's a warm color. And then cool colors are those that are more associated with water or ice, coldness, the blues, violets, greens, and so forth. Warm colors visually tend to appear that they're popping towards you. They look like they pop out from the page and tend to have more high energy. So they're more action-oriented and exciting, whereas cool colors will tend to recede away. They will, in an image, will appear to drop towards the background. And they are usually calm and subdued, so lower energy. There are exceptions, I will say. If you have a darker shade of, say, red, it might not be as high energy as a brighter, more vibrant variety of that. But for the most part, these qualities will be true. And this is very much like the earlier movie poster we saw, the romantic film. Those analogous colors, those ones that are closer together, are very soft. There's not a lot of contrast, so it's not harsh. It's very gentle on our eyes. And so really works well with something that is more subdued in as far as the action and as far as the emotion. Whereas if we wanted something to really contrast, something to really capture attention or create more of an exciting feel, then we pair colors that are opposites. So in this case, and this is very much like the Action Doctor poster we saw earlier, there's no question where your focal point is going to be, because it's that highly contrasting element that's on there. It draws our attention. And also notice this is the warm and cool colors, that it's actually a melted candle, but it's made to look like a piece of coral reef really jumps forward, whereas the blues recede into the background. And that's the two color relationships that I really want you to remember. If everything else spawns from that idea. Opposites on the color wheel, high energy, high contrast. Those close on the color wheel, low contrast, lower energy, more harmonious. If you just keep those two rules in mind, you can plan your color schemes pretty effectively to match the kind of vibe that you want to create within any media project that you're working on. But there are more options than that, and that's what we'll get into with the different color schemes. Oh, one comment that I wanted to make, and this is something I see often in the exploration, is that when you're examining a color scheme, it's important to look at all of the colors within the design together. Because if I just focused on the background, then I could say, well, there's monochromatic colors here, and then some analogous colors here, but I have to look at this whole thing. If I look at all the colors together, then you see the complementary relationship, because these are interacting with each other, the blues and the oranges. So I'm just kind of rushing through. Are there any questions? Anybody have anything that's not clear? Okay, great. So those are the two basic rules, complementary and analogous colors. But there's more options than that, of course. If you only have one color, then that would be what's called monochromatic. Mono meaning single, and chroma is actually refers to color. So that means single color. So this means your entire design only has one color. You could have tints and shades, so lighter and darker varieties of that color, but you're still only dealing with that color. This is the lowest possible color richness that you can have. Can create very clean and elegant designs, and tends to have a very low energy effect because you don't have very much contrast. So it's very similar to analogous, but just doesn't have as much color variety. And here's an example from fine art, the fine art world. This is a painting by Pablo Picasso, and it only has blue. This is all one color hue, but different shades and tints. So you see, you can still create a sense of form, of shadow and highlights, and you can see some shape, but it's only one single color, and that's monochromatic. Here's a more modern day example of a monochromatic design. So you see it's all those tints and shades of blue, no other colors. And remember, black and white are achromatic, so they're considered non-colors. They're pure value. So they're kind of freebies. You can use them in any design, regardless of what color scheme you've picked. And this is a cool monochromatic. Here's a warm monochromatic, and this is somebody's exploration poster that I picked that I threw in here. Really good example of a monochromatic design, and you can see there's variation because you do have those tints and shades of the same color, but still has the single hue. I'm getting a little bit into psychology, so a little bit ahead of myself, but you can see how the cool colors create that more serene feeling, whereas the warm colors have a little bit more impression of action, and maybe with the faded yellows gives you the impression of antiquity, since this is a period piece set back in the 1800s. So monochromatic can be useful for creating a very serene, very elegant design, a little bit low energy. If you want to have a very similar vibe, but have a little bit more color richness, then you can use analogous colors. And those are just colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. Since they're closely related, then there's still low contrast. But you can differentiate shapes, differentiate objects, and have just a richer color experience. And this is a painting by Claude Monet. I have the wrong tag on there, but you can see how they're fairly similar as far as the color variety. And this one we've seen before. This is warm analogous colors, and it creates that feeling of warmth. It's still very low contrast and so low energy, but has that warm romantic feeling. And this was somebody else's choice from the exploration. This might be one of you two's, but I'm not sure. And this would be analogous with yellow, orange, and red. And the warm colors are a little bit more action-oriented, but in here they're using a lot of shadow, which kind of tones it down a little bit, gives it more of a serious and mysterious feel. So both of these are analogous warm color palettes, but you can see very different impressions are created based on how the color is used and the amount of shadow, amount of light versus shadow, and so forth. And just to be clear, these rules apply in any visual media. So I like to throw in some other examples. This is a web design that uses analogous colors, blues and greens, and sort of some teals. They do have this red pencil and thumbtacks thrown in there just to throw everything out of whack. But the design as a whole is cool, analogous colors. So it's this, I believe, is an architect website, and it keeps that kind of business-like look. It is very friendly and approachable, but not overly energetic, but it has enough color richness to allow them to color code the navigation. And you'll see this in movies as well. Same ideas. And seeing the movie posters are an indication of that. But I'll have a few shots from movie scenes coming up as well. So that's the more low energy side. That's the analogous colors. Those are more harmonious, so lower energy. But if you wanted to make a really dynamic impression, then you use complementary colors. Complementary colors, this word complementary can be a little misleading. This, because sometimes I hear this used to say, oh, they just look pretty together, but it really has a very specific formal meaning, and that is they're direct opposites on the color wheel. So they have a very stark contrast that's really dynamic because our eyes are trying to interpret competing colors, and so it creates this vibration that really makes the difference stand out to us. And this is a painting by Vincent van Gogh, and he's used the complementary blue and orange, which is a very popular complementary color pair, to really make the cafe scene stand out. It really jumps towards us, whereas the cityscape is blue and fades into the background. Not a really action-packed scene, but that warm orange paired with the blue gives it a sense of life and warmth and energy. Here's a movie scene. This is Life of Pi. I don't know if you guys have seen this movie. It's a really visually stunning film. But notice the orange of the life raft and the lifeboat, and how that contrasts so strongly with the blue of the ocean. It's really vibrant. I think everything in this movie has the saturation really bumped up to make it just really just an incredible experience. But yeah, it's a great movie if you've ever seen it. There's a lot of symbolism and meaning. I think they stayed pretty true to the book, which was great. But what's interesting with this scene in particular, and something I learned actually because of this movie, is that they make life rafts and life jackets and vests orange for this very reason, because it is a complementary color to the blue of the ocean. So if there's rescuers out trying to find you, they can spot you based on that contrast. You'll stand out in the ocean. So it's a little fact for you, along with the movie scene, and certainly played a part in the filming of this movie as well. And it's that orange and blue. that same orange and blue from the painting and from every blockbuster movie ever made. You can see Iron Man here, the action-packed warm colors paired against the blue of the background that really makes him stand out, gives him some extra excitement. And if you look at Transformers, most of these Marvel films, most any action film, even the Star Wars movie poster that somebody used for their exploration uses the orange and blue. The reason being that it allows for that warm versus cool color pairing. It allows for that. It's really exciting, complementary color combination. And just lots of really good contrast. So it works really well for that genre. And a little bit different take on it, and this again is getting a little bit into our color psychology topic, but here you see how the color moods correspond with the expressions. Very much like what we saw with the Chipotle commercial, where the colors changed as the mood changed. Here we have Jason Bateman showing a very distressed look, struggling with these infants, and the colors associated are blue, which if you think about what does it mean when you say you're feeling blue, it means you're sad, you're troubled. And then Ryan Reynolds down here with the young ladies and obviously looking like he's having a better time, and that's associated with the warm, upbeat, more energetic orange. Really focused a lot on the orange and blue combinations, but this is not limited to that. Green and red are a complementary pair, and we saw that in the Chipotle commercial with the pepper. Really stood out. There's no question where your eye is going to go because that red pepper is contrasting so strongly against the green of the garden. So draw immediately became the focal point. And also here in the movie Harry Potter, I'm not sure which film this was from, but in the Quidditch match, there's the green of the background, and Harry Potter in his Hogwarts Gryffindor robes are red against that green background, and so he becomes the focal point. He's not in the foreground because Draco Malfoy is the larger object, but he blends with the background, whereas Harry Potter contrasts. And so he keeps our attention. So you see how they're really planning this to direct our attention exactly where they want it to be. It's all very well thought out. None of this is left to chance. And just to show how this is used in unexpected places, if you look at most any newscast, the background is going to be a cool color, usually a blue. Sometimes it looks like there's monitors and something important happening in the background, but really that's just a contrasting backdrop to make the skin tones stand out. It keeps your focus on the anchor person or whoever is talking at that time. This is again very deliberately done to keep your attention focused where they want it to be, where it needs to be. Any thoughts or questions so far? Okay, so when you have those basic relationships, analogous and complementary or monochromatic, you can then expand on that and start adding in more color in order to get a richer design. So you're not limited to picking 2 colors or 3 colors. You can add in more. If you have a color in the 2 colors that are adjacent to its opposite, so you would have a complementary pair, but you take the colors next to the complement. That's called split complementary. And so this is just a way of keeping that high energy, but adding in a more color richness. It's slightly less contrast because you're getting away from true opposites, but still it's pretty close, and still keeps that very high contrast in there. So looking at a web design now, and compare this to the architect website that we saw earlier that was analogous, the energy level is very different, isn't it? It's more upbeat, maybe more high energy, and if you look at the way this website's designed, you can see why they chose that. That architect website was more business oriented. It's more serious. It was friendly enough, but it was still more down to business. This one, if you start looking at some of the details, it's a web design service. It says great websites, no lame marketing slogans. Some of the copy is seriously these days everyone and their mom has a website. So obviously they're taking a much more tongue-in-cheek approach, and much more lighthearted with the silly little boy with squiggles drawn on his face. And the color scheme ties right into that. It's more upbeat. It has that the orange, blue, and green contrast. So you see how this is something that's really decided on up front. It's something that's chosen early on. Once you come up with your design concept, then you can really, if you understand how these color relationships work, can immediately start planning how which colors you're going to use to stay consistent with your energy and with your message. And you don't have to stop at 3 colors. You can keep going. This is a tetradic color palette, which has 2 sets of complementary colors. So 4 colors opposites on the color wheel. Still really, really vibrant energy, really vibrant contrast, and lots of color richness. So another painting by Monet, and you see he really liked to use color anyway, but now he's got really contrasting colors. It tends to be very playful, very upbeat and happy, and sometimes can be very childlike because it's really sensory stimulating. So not surprisingly, and you see this in some Tim Burton movies like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which I always get the titles confused with the old one, but I think this is Willy Wonka, and that one was Charlie. So yeah, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, complementary red and green, complementary purple and yellow. So lots of contrast that keeps that energy up, that visual pop going in the scenes. And nearly the same color combinations here used in PBS Kids website. So it's still kind of keeping that very lighthearted impression and making use of these really vibrant colors to help support that. Yet another Tim Burton film. And this was from the Exploration. This is Alice in Wonderland. Much more subdued than Willy Wonka. You still have blue and orange. There's orange in the underside of this big mushroom and in the rabbit's ear, as well as red and green, with pink being a tint of red. So still have a lot of nice complementary colors. They're just desaturated, so they're subdued. So it's not as high energy as Willy Wonka was, but still a very color-rich design. Okay, this was Jasmine's, and yeah, very good choice. Very interesting use of color. in all of the color relationships we looked at so far, they've been dealing with either colors that are all on one side of the color wheel or colors that are opposites on the color wheel. What happens when they're from equal distances on the color wheel? And that's what you have with triadic. So you have three colors equally spaced, so none of them are opposites and none of them are directly next to each other. So it's kind of a middle ground. It's a middle of the road. You have a good amount of harmony, but also a fair amount of contrast. And so you have kind of a moderate amount of visual energy. And Rosie the Riveter is one example of this. And using comics. I haven't seen a whole lot of examples of this that are from photographs, or it doesn't seem to occur very often in nature, but very often in posters, in comics, in graphic design, you'll see the triadic. Not to say it can't happen in movie posters, but don't see it very often. So those are the basic color relationships: the complementary, analogous, split complementary, tetradic, and triadic. And you can refer to those in your readings, in your textbooks, for easy review. These color relationships are used in all forms of visual art, design, and media. And this is just to illustrate that point. These are some pictures from fashion design. I think these are a little bit dated based on the fashions, but if you look at the colors, you see those same color relationships, monochromatic, with the entire outfit being a single color, analogous with very closely related colors paired together, and even going into complementary, there's that orange and blue, red and green, and split complementary. So whatever your field of interest is, these concepts are going to be present. They're going to be a factor, and even as we saw in the newsroom. And the one that I haven't mentioned yet is achromatic. I did talk about that at the very beginning. Achromatic and neutral colors. Neutral colors are really tricky to even talk about, because what is neutral and what is not neutral is a little bit a fine line. Achromatic is easier because that just means there's no color. It's strictly black and white. Black and white or achromatic designs usually are lower energy than color, because you don't have the advantage of that color contrast in relationship. Which isn't to say they can't be visually interesting. The illustration here is one of M.C. Escher's pen and ink drawings, and it's pretty interesting, pretty intriguing image. But again, you just don't have the same pop that you would with color. Neutral colors are things. The example usually here is brown, and brown is there's a lot of different colors that we would call brown. If some browns are more reddish, some browns are more yellow, some are more orange. Usually brown is a darker shade of one of those colors. But sometimes you have like tan or khaki or camel, some of those brown hues that don't really resemble any of the other colors. So they're really not on the color wheel. And since they don't have an opposite, they don't have a complement, they're neutral. And that's what we would call neutral. So it's sort of a matter of perception in that regard. A lot of the achromatic designs are very serious. They can be very dark and gritty. And here we have James Bond in Skyfall giving us an example of that. Again, doesn't always have to be the case. You can have very elegant and and very sentimental looking images that are black and white, but this seems to be a pretty common use of the palette. And then the trick that is sometimes used is the accent color, accented achromatics or accented neutrals, where you have a colorless image with just one splash of color. And this is what we saw at the very beginning with one of the fake movie posters. But here, this is a scene from Schindler's List with the little girl in the red jacket, and it creates that focal point. Our eye is drawn to that position. So if you want to attract attention to that spot, you can use that accent color. Sometimes it can be very symbolic, and I believe there's some symbolism going on with in this film, since she's the only thing that's ever in color in the movie. But I can't really explain what that represents in this case. And another example, again, creating a focal point through color. It's not entirely colorless, but her skin is so pale as to almost be colorless. And so the red slip really becomes what draws the eye. And there was an example from the exploration of Maleficent, which I wish I had included here. The Maleficent poster that had only her lips were red. The rest was a really pale blue tint that was desaturated to where it was almost gray. So it, in effect, was an accented achromatic design. And again, just really draws attention to that focal point. And you can use this in web design and other design, any other kind of media design to draw attention. So in this web design, you see the register now button is highlighted in red. The main content area is highlighted in red, and as is the word design. So the designer is defining what they want you to pay attention to. Any thoughts on color theory? Anything that I've talked about? Yeah, and Jasmine says it makes her pay more attention to things, and that's something that I'd really encourage you to do is become more aware. Just in day-to-day life, as you're watching TV, as you're watching movies, or experiencing any kind of media, whether it's a magazine or a billboard, look at how they're using colors and ask yourself why they pick those colors, because it's safe bet that it was all done very intentionally. So now we'll turn to the topic of color psychology, and that's a related topic. There's sometimes the line blurs between color theory and color psychology, but color psychology is more about what colors mean to us specifically. When you see the colors that are on the screen here, what comes to mind when you see those two together? Okay, stop and go was Jasmine's pick, and that's pretty good choice. Yeah, in our world, we come to learn that a red light or a red stop sign means to stop, and green is go. It's something in our culture. It's ingrained in us. Even before we drive, we know about that. There's even that. I don't know if kids still play the game, red light, green light, where you have to stop when they call red light and run when they say green light. But anyway, it's something that we are really conditioned to recognize. Are there any other associations with red and green that come to mind? Allison says Christmas, and that is another really good choice. And yeah, these have become sort of the unofficial or official colors of Christmas, of the Christmas holiday. When that time of year rolls around, you start seeing a lot of red and green in the decorations, in wrapping paper, and so forth. I think this may originate from the holly leaves and the holly berries, but now we see it in the wreaths and the trees and everywhere else. So even for those who don't celebrate Christmas, if you live in the United States or in the Western Hemisphere, you probably come to recognize this pretty readily. So those are examples of color psychology, and what you see is a lot of this comes from our culture, from what we learn growing up, what we learn to recognize. A lot of it, most of it is not necessarily instinctive, although there are some cases where it is. But mostly it's things we come to acknowledge and come to recognize. One of the exceptions, I would say, to that is the color red. This is something that is very much innate to us, to our instincts. We have an interesting response to the color red in our environment. If you read in the textbook readings from the content focus, they talk about the red effect, where if you go into a Target store, and because all the Target branding is red with the signs that are red and the labels that are red, it has this effect of very slightly, very slightly diminishing our ability to problem solve and avoid impulse buys, basically. So if you ever walk into Target, go into Target to buy toilet paper and walk out with a couple $100 worth of clothes and home decor, then maybe you can blame the red effect on that. But what it also happens is that they've seen this effect in sports, where a sports team, if one team has red in their uniform, they will tend to win more often statistically. So it's very small odds, but statistically they tend to win more often because of that red effect that affects the other team that's seeing their uniform. And that's also been observed in games like Halo, where it's electronic games with teams competing, red versus blue. And it's possible that that's because red is the color of our blood. And so when you see red on an instinctive level, that means something bad is happening and you need to get out of there really fast. And so it is a very subtle kind of fight or flight survival response. Although somewhat contradictory to that, red is also often associated with passion and strong emotion. And think about Valentine's Day, when suddenly everything is red and there's red hearts everywhere. I'm not entirely sure where that comes from, although perhaps the red of blushing and our flushed appearance is red too, so that could be an instinctive thing as well. But there are those two somewhat contradictory associations of danger and passion, which sometimes passion can be dangerous, but you see how those connections aren't always related. We saw this one last week, I think, this design with the flame of desire and the red car. This is something that's interesting, and this is how this color psychology is applied. There's a lot of ways you can apply color psychology. The presentation, the recording in the content focus talks about color psychology in logo design, and I encourage you to take a look at that as time permits. But it's also applied in TV and filmmaking in ways that you really wouldn't be aware of, perhaps, unless you really studied this. This is an infographic that someone created. Have either of you watched the series Breaking Bad at all? If not, there's going to be some spoilers, some mild spoilers here. So, it's the story of I think he's a high school chemistry teacher who he is diagnosed with cancer, and in order to make enough money to make sure his family is taken care of and to pay for his medical bills, he starts making crystal meth, which is not that important for what we're talking about here, but that's the premise. We have these characters, and what you see in this infographic is that someone has taken the entire series, looked at each episode, and recorded the colors associated with each character in each episode, maybe even each scene in the series. Really insane amount of work, but to our benefit, we can look at this and see some interesting information. There's this character of Jesse Pinkman, and that's the one I like to look at because he is a young man. He's very high-strung, so has a short temper, tends to run off at the mouth, and just is cursing every other word, and just a really kind of a hothead, you might call him. And if you look at his timeline here, you see a lot of warm colors, red and yellow. And that's something we would expect to be associated with someone with that kind of emotional state. So what this represents perhaps is the clothes he's wearing, or the car he's driving, or the room he's in, and the decor, the colors that are associated with this character. And this is all planned by the creators of this TV show. If you look at this quote by the creator, Vince Gilligan, he says, "I want to do the color timing for each of these episodes where you sit with the colorist and make sure that the color of each individual scene is just the way you want it." So they know that this is going to influence you, the viewer, and make you feel more engaged with this, what's happening on the screen. So they plan these things. And if you look at, let's go to marker number 3, you see there's that red. So he's probably being very volatile as he is. Then suddenly at 3, it all goes black. The color is gone. And you look at what happened, because they've got this key that goes along with that. At point number 3, he's abducted by Tuco, who is this drug lord in the show. So something really bad just happened to him. And so now he's in this dark place. Maybe he's locked in a car trunk, for all I don't remember now. But that very explosive emotion suddenly went out. He's in a achromatic space. And it comes back later. Obviously, things get better for him. Let's jump down here to point number 5. So you see again, there's a lot of red. And I remember at this point, he's partying a lot. He's made a lot of money on their drug enterprise, and he's sort of being very hedonistic. But then at this point number 5, it goes gray. It's sort of a gray-green. So the color again goes out. What happened there is his girlfriend dies in the show. So the emotion kind of drains out of his character. And yeah, this is someone with a lot of time on their hands to put this all together. Really good reference, though. And so the color is gone. Then it goes from gray to black and white. So really just continues that achromatic streak. What happens then at point number 6 is he goes into rehab. So you see he's just at a really low point in his life, and the colors are made to go along with that. So all of these things are really planned out. It's all very deliberately we put in place. And we saw that with the Scarecrow video as a smaller example, but this is done in every TV show that you would watch and every movie. Surely you've seen The Matrix, right? If not, there will be spoilers here. In The Matrix, a lot of the action takes place in an artificial world. They're in a computer simulated world, but the main character doesn't know that at first. And we don't know that at first when we first see the movie, unless you've heard spoilers already. But what you see is that there's always something off about the color. It doesn't ever seem quite natural. In this case, there's this green tint to everything, or green cast to everything, including Morpheus's skin tone. It has just a little touch of green to it that we know is not natural to the world we know. And that's done to make us feel a little off, like something isn't quite right. It's a little bit alien to us, but you can't quite put your finger on it. And it signifies that they're in this artificial world, because when they escape and they get into what is the real world, in quotation marks, in the movie, now we see natural, warm skin tones. The environment is more lifelike and it feels more alive. This is a particularly exceptional example because they're celebrating in this scene, so everybody is really sweaty and worked up and a lot of skin showing. But we finally see the natural coloration, and so we can compare those two. There's a distinctive change. And then there's a third environment, though, when they leave the safety of their home and go out into this post-apocalyptic world where the machines rule. Everything is gray and blue, like kind of this blue-gray and green. It's very lifeless. And that's meant to signify that they're no longer safe. They're still in the, quote, real world of the movie, but they're away from the life of this the city and into where the machines, these lifeless, feelingless machines, are in control. So it's another change in the mood, in the overall emotion. There's a really good example of this in the content focus too that deals with the movie Black Hawk Down. So take a look at that when you get a chance if you haven't already. It's the one that deals with color correction in film. So really subtle, really effective in affecting our moods within movies and visual media. And sometimes this takes precedent over the color theory. We know that the complementary colors create excitement. Sometimes in design, you really just want to focus on the color associations instead of the relationship of the specific colors. And that's what I saw with a few of your exploration posters. This is from the recent movie Inside Out, which I have not seen, and I hear that it's really good. But in this poster, we're not really focused on a complementary relationship or an analogous relationship. We're really focused on the colors associated with the characters. And by extension of that, the colors associated with each emotion, because if you know about this movie, each of the characters is actually a feeling or an emotion inside of a person's, inside of their head, with sadness being blue and I can't remember, is this envy that's green? And happiness is yellow and anger is red and fear is purple. Disgust is green. Okay. And if you think about how those colors work, if you think about blue, what does blue mean? If you're feeling blue, it means you're sad. If we saw with Breaking Bad, red is often anger. And yellow is a very sunny color. It's very bright and happy. And so happiness is yellow. I'm not sure about the fear being purple, where that comes from, but I guess that works. And disgust, green. Now green has a lot of different associations. Sometimes it's, you think of it in connection with plant life and living things and nature. like the recycling logo and so forth. But it can also be a sign of being queasy and sick and ill. So I think that's where that comes from with disgust. And the rest of the colors in this poster correspond to one of those characters. So really the entire poster design is based around these associations and not on color relationships. There was another one, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles poster that has a similar scheme where it's the colors associated with each turtle it's in almost a grid or block. And another one that really uses more, makes more use of color associations than a color scheme, and this is from Les Miserables. Les Miserables, I always pronounce it wrong. And the colors here are taken directly from the French flag, so the blue, white, and red. And because the movie is set during the French Revolution, so that association is used in the film or in the poster design, but it's also made to look very grim and dark with the black background and even the very distressed looking distortion of the colors. And then going beyond that, though, there's associations in what the colors are connected with in the imagery. The characters down here, and I actually haven't seen Les Mis yet, either in the theater or in the movie or in the stage, but these two characters I know are caught up in the French Revolution. So there's a lot of danger, a lot of turmoil and fighting going on. And so the red really corresponds well with that. So they've placed them within the red part of the flag. And then there's this figure up here that's blue, and he's in the military uniform, which would have been blue in that time period, and has a very authoritative appearance. And blue is a good color for that. If you think about police officers, they have the blue uniforms. They're authority figures. So made really good use of associations. This is not really a specific color scheme. It's pretty close to a complementary color scheme with red and blue, but not a true complementary color scheme. But puts more emphasis on what we associate those colors with. And a thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about these associations is sometimes this can be very individual. Say my favorite color is teal, and I might include teal in my personal logo design because I like it. But that's not necessarily going to translate to everybody else. So think about universal meaning as well. What kind of associations might this have? Blue, they always say, is a very trustworthy color. And as we saw here, it's a very authoritative color. So you see that used with a lot of political campaigns. You probably wouldn't see pink or lavender or teal or some of these more lighthearted colors used in that context, even if it's the candidate's favorite color, just because it's not going to communicate that to their audience. And I'm certainly not telling you to not use your favorite colors in your personal branding and logo or your personal designs, but just think about that and what kind of impression that's going to make. So here's a quick exercise for you as we wind down. And when I show you this ad design, I want you to tell me what impression it gives and what role color plays in creating that impression. So here's our example. Okay, and Jasmine says it's old and makes her think the gray scheme makes her think of gloom, so it's very gloomy. And look at also at the message and what this is an ad for. It looks like it's an ad for a medication of some kind. But the tagline says out of the hospital doesn't mean out of the woods. So, and we know that out of the woods is a common term used to mean out of danger. So we can assume that this person has been in the hospital at some point in recent history, and he's now home, but he's not yet out of danger. And they've used a visual metaphor for out of the woods with these trees, the very dead, ghostly looking trees. They are very creepy. So that would certainly correspond with that feeling of gloom. But really to highlight that, they've used this pale blue glow. It looks like it's coming from the TV set, but it's a very ghostly, maybe sickly, cold feeling. So it's the cool colors, cold feeling. And that really contrasts with the warmer colors of the house. He's in the living room, which by the very name says it's a place where life happens. You have these warm leather, the colors of the leather and the sofa. Even the carpet has a little bit of a warm hue. The kitchen has a lot of yellow, very vibrant, very lifelike. But all around him is kind of ghostly, sickly looking, very gloomy. So they've used color in that case and to really emphasize that idea of being sick or being unhealthy. Any thoughts or questions on anything that we've covered tonight? No? Okay, so that has been a crash course in color theory and color psychology. Keep these ideas in mind, and as I said, start developing that critical mindset. And anything that you look at, start wondering why they chose those colors and how does that support their goals. But that brings us to the end of the session for tonight. If you have any questions, you can ask now, or you can shoot me an email later as they come to mind. Otherwise, thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful night.